Hello and welcome back to the Professing Alls. My name is Ryan. It is good to see you here again. Today we're going to be continuing our learning of Greek verbs, of basic Greek verbs. So verbs in the present tense are the verbs that we're looking at currently. Now last week we learned our first Greek word, echo. Echo means I have. Now, to put it in the present tense, in the different forms based on whether it's singular or plural, first person or second or third person, these are the forms that they take. Echo, echis, echi, echomen, echete, echusen. Now, this verb represents a type of verb in Greek which ends in an omega in the first person singular. There are different types of verbs in Greek. Most of them are the same. Most of them have an omega at the ending. Sometimes there's a slight variant on the omega. And then there's a small category of other verbs that have different endings. But most Greek verbs have these endings. So if a Greek word in the first person singular ends in an omega, it will generally follow this pattern. Now, next week, we're going to still deal with omega class verbs in the present tense, but we're going to be looking at just some that vary a little bit, okay? They're not major variants, but they're just important to learn because those variants contain important words to know. But we're just starting with the basic, so that way when we go to the variants, you're able to see the pattern coming through even in the variants. So we're going to learn a couple new words today, okay, just using the same pattern. We're not going to do anything extremely different. We're just going to create paradigms. So when you expound a word in its various components, that's called a paradigm. When you do it specifically for verbs, it's called a conjugation. When you do it for nouns, it's called a declension. Now, it doesn't really matter what you call it. You can call it a paradigm, a declension, a conjugation. Doesn't really matter, but basically the breakdown of the word in its various forms, depending on its function, is basically what a paradigm refers to. Okay? Now, the first verb, actually what I'll do is I'll go through the verbs, the new words that we're going to be learning before we decline them, or conjugate them, I should say, using verbs. So the first verb is akouo. Akouo. This is related to the English word acoustic, and it means I hear. Akouo. Vlepo. Vlepo. I see. Vlepo. Grafo. I write. Grafo. This is where we get words in English that have graph in it. For example, graph paper is paper that you write or draw on. Photography, or photography I should say. So photo is the Greek word for light. Graphy is to write. So it's written things using light. So you use light to write, which is a picture. Okay, photography. And geography, the study of the geo, which is the earth. So there's a lot of words in English that have the word graph in it. Didasco. Didasco means I teach. Didasco. Pembo. Pempo. I send. Pempo. Sozo. I save. Sozo. And the last word here is not a verb, but it's an adverb. So we have the word u, which means not. Now, u, there are three different forms to say not in Biblical Greek. The root word is u. However, if it is followed by a consonant, it will be slightly different. If the consonant has a smooth breathing, then u will take a kappa. So ook, ook, ook. If it is followed by a rough breathing, now using modern Greek pronunciation, we don't pronounce the distinction. In Erasmian Greek, this is unaspirated, which means you pronounce it ah, as you normally would. And this is rough, which means you pronounce it aspirated, which is ha, ha. That's if you're using Erasmian Greek. So you use the kappa if it's a smooth breathing, and you use a he if it's a rough breathing. So ook, ah, or uk, ah, or ook, ha if you're using the Erasmian pronunciation. Now, we don't have any word so far that has the rough breathing mark, so you don't need to worry too much about that one today, okay? Just be aware that it exists, but we do have a few that have a vowel but have a smooth breathing, okay? Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to work on conjugating these verbs, okay? So, first one, akuo, I hear. Akuo. Akuo. I hear. Now, this is the same as hear, which is echo. So how do you think you'll get you here? Well, in the same way, you've got to drop the omega and add the epsilon, iota, sigma ending. So we have aku, is, akuis, akuis, you here, akuis. Now, the only difference between the second person and the third person is you drop the sigma. Akui, he hears, or she hears, or it hears, or one hears. Now, the third person, obviously you can use he hears, she hears, it hears, or one hears. In the translation, you only have to give one. If you're writing a translation, just write one or the other, okay? Or if you just want to simplify it just down to he or she, that's also okay as well, because generally there's not going to be many it's that can hear, okay? So he or she hears. Now, to get the plural of the first person, whoops, I'm missing an omicron. Akuomen. 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 We hear. Akuomen. Akuomen. To get the second person plural, akuete. Akuete. So you see the ending is the same. So you're changing the endings to change whether it's first, second, or third person, or singular or plural. And lastly, akusen. Akusen. Now you can have a guttural stop in between akusen. You can have that double oo sound, or you can just merge it into one sound. But you have to write both syllables. So you can pronounce it akusen or akusen, which is hard phonetically to distinguish, especially if you're beginning in a language. So just pronounce it akusen, but recognize there's two omicron epsilons there, okay? All right, so that is I hear. Now, next one is vlepo. Vlepo. Vlepo becomes vlepis. You see. Vlepis. You see. Vlepi. She sees or he sees. Vlepomen. Vlepomen. We see. Vlepomen. Vlepete. You see. Vlepete. Vlepusen. Vlepusen. They see. So I'm hoping you are starting to see how conjugations are starting to form. Okay? So all the forms are exactly the same. Now we're going to do one more. We'll do grafo. Now I'm not going to do these three, okay? I'm going to get you, before the next video, you have to write the conjugations of these three, okay? Just follow the same pattern as what we have been doing for echo, akuo, and vlepo, and what we're about to do for grafo, and then you'll be able to do it yourself with any verb that follows these patterns. Now, I'm going to remove the aid up the top, okay? So, now this one, we are going to do a little bit differently, okay? I'm going to say one of the verb forms in English, and you have to try and give me it in Greek, okay? Now, if I use the first person singular or second person singular, which is you, I will just swap you for thou, okay? I'm not going to change the verb to thou write. Well, I may as well write thou writest. But try to give me the form, okay? And I'll write the form up here. Obviously, I can't hear you, but just play along a little bit. Okay. They write. They write. Grafusen. Grafusen. Now I should say at any point, if you want, you can pause the video when I say the phrase in English and you write it in Greek and try and say it if you want. There are different ways that you can do it. You can just do it ad hoc like what we're doing. Thou writest. Thou writest. Grafis. 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 We write. We write. Grafomen. 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 I write. I write. Grafo. Grafo. She writes. She writes. Grafi. Grafi. You write in the plural. You write. Grafete. Grafete. Right, that's enough for us to work on today. Now, I'm just going to point out two things, a little bit extra for you to learn. These are not major things, but just simple things. Okay. Now, I've given you the word not here. So this turns a word or a verb into a negative. So if you want to say, I write, you say, γράφω. I write. But if you want to say, I don't write, then you say, ου γράφω. Not I write. ου γράφω. ου γράφω. I do not write. And if you want to say, you do not hear is uk. Because remember, to hear is akuo. It has a smooth breathing, so you got to add the kappa. Uk akuete. Uk akuete. Okay? And the last thing that we can learn, which is very simple, is adding a question mark. So a question mark in Greek, so if I go back to the verb grapho, that means I write. It can have a full stop, it can have just a comma, there could be a space, there could be a semicolon, okay? And that just means I write. But if I want to say, do I write? Make it a question. We add the question mark. Γράφω. Γράφω. Do you have? Έχετε. Does he have? Έχει. Now, usually you put a bit of intonation on the accented syllable to make it a bit of a question, but as long as there's a rise in tone. But in writing, all you do is just add a question mark, and it puts it as a question. So similarly here, this says, I don't write. If I put a question mark on the end, don't I write? It becomes a question. You hear, or you don't hear, or don't you hear? Can't you hear? Don't you hear? Alright, so those are really simple things to learn. So the main focus is obviously the vocabulary and the verb forms, and these are just a few basic extras. Now, the last thing I'll point out as well, if you are paying attention to the accents, what you would have noticed with these verbs is that it always has an acute accent, and it's always over the syllable just before the ending. Okay? So whatever the ending is, doesn't matter what the ending is, the acute accent is going to go on the syllable just before it. Okay? So here we have akuo. Akuo. So the ending is omega, okay? And it changes to akuis, you hear. So the omega is the ending. So the syllable before the ending is the u sound. U. So you have akuo. Okay, that's where the accent falls. And it's always going to be an acute in this case. Now here, the ending is akuete. Now, the ending has two syllables. Over here, it only has one. That doesn't matter. It'll still fall on that syllable. Okay? So if you are paying attention to writing the accents, these verbs are really easy because the acute accent will always fall on that second to last syllable, which makes it very easy to identify. Now, most verbs function in these ways, okay? So if you learn these forms of verbs, you would have learnt quite a fair amount of Greek verbal forms for the singular form. Now, you might not know the specific vocabulary, but as you come across words, you might recognize their form. You might not know what they mean, but you might recognize their form. So if you see a particular word with a particular ending and you are familiar with the verse in English, you might be able to guess roughly what the root word is, the I form, to change the ending to an omega, and then go look in the dictionary and you'd be able to find what it means. And then you'd be able to translate the verb in that form in the sentence. So you are learning quite a fair bit, okay? It's actually a little, but in terms of the breadth of usage that it's used in the Bible, it's quite large. So you by learning a very little bit, you're actually learning quite a lot. So if you're at this stage and you're starting to get the handle of things, you've made quite a progress from last episode or the episode before where you pretty well knew nothing. So you're already starting to get your feet into the water of Greek. So I'm hoping that you're starting to feel a little bit confident and you're starting to feel a little bit excited in learning Greek, and I hope that joy continues. And if you're a little bit frustrated, just rewatch the videos, take your time, don't rush things, just spend a little bit every day working on things a little bit at a time, whether it's vocab or grammar. So we'll see you in the next video. Like, comment, and subscribe if you've liked this video, and we'll see you in the next video.